When I pulled into the parking lot of the Silver Pines Motel, I thought it was just another pit stop on my road trip to nowhere. The neon sign flickered above me, struggling to stay lit, casting an eerie glow over the cracked pavement. It was late, and the only sound was the distant rustle of trees swaying in the wind. Little did I know, this would be a night I would never forget. My name is Jake, and I was at a crossroads in my life. A week prior, I had lost my job, and my girlfriend had packed her bags and left me for someone who could offer her more than I ever could. I needed to escape the memories, the suffocating weight of my failures, and I thought hitting the open road would provide the clarity I desperately sought. But as I stepped into the small, dimly lit lobby of the motel, I felt an unsettling sensation wash over me, a sense that I was stepping into something much darker than I had anticipated. The receptionist, an elderly woman with a vacant stare, handed me the key to room 7 without a word. The key felt heavy in my palm, as if it held a secret I wasn't yet privy to. As I made my way to the room, I noticed the peeling wallpaper and the musty smell that lingered in the air. There was something off about the place, but I shrugged it off, convincing myself it was just my overactive imagination. I opened the door to my room, and a shiver ran down my spine. The room was small, with a bed pushed against one wall and a window that looked out onto the darkened parking lot. I dropped my bag and plopped down on the bed, letting out a sigh of relief. It was quiet, and for a moment, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I switched on the TV to drown out the silence, but the screen flickered with static. Frustrated, I turned it off and decided to explore the motel a bit. I stepped outside, taking in the stillness of the night. As I walked down the narrow walkway, I noticed the other rooms were all dark, except for one at the end of the hall, room 8. A faint light flickered through the curtains, and I could hear muffled voices. It piqued my curiosity, but I quickly dismissed it. Just a couple of travelers, I muttered to myself, shaking my head as I made my way back to my room. I tried to write in my journal, hoping to pour my thoughts onto the pages and make sense of everything, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself listening to the voices from room 8, their murmurs growing more intense. Suddenly, the voices stopped, replaced by a sharp scream that pierced the night. My heart raced as I jumped to my feet, instinctively heading towards the door. I stood there for a moment, frozen, unsure of what to do. Should I call the front desk? Should I check on them? But just as quickly as the scream had erupted, silence enveloped the motel once more. I took a deep breath, shaking off my nerves. It was just a couple fighting, nothing to concern myself over. I climbed back into bed, pulling the thin sheets over me. Sleep came easily, and for a brief moment, I felt at peace. That is until I was jolted awake by a soft knock at the door. I groaned, rubbing my eyes and trying to shake off the remnants of sleep. Who the hell could that be? I mumbled, swinging my legs over the side of the bed. I peered through the peephole, half expecting to see the front desk clerk, but instead I was met with a young woman, her face pale and anxious. I hesitated for a moment, then opened the door a crack. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "Please," she whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "I need to get out of here. They're coming for me." Her eyes were wide with fear, and instinctively, I felt my heart rate quicken. "Who's coming for you?" "The people in room 8, she said, her voice trembling. They hurt my friend. You have to help me." Before I could respond, she pushed the door open, stepping into my room uninvited. "Please, you have to let me stay here for a little while," she pleaded, her breath coming in quick bursts. I stood frozen, torn between wanting to help her and the instinct to slam the door shut. But something in her gaze held me captive. Okay, I said slowly, backing away from the door. Just calm down." As she sank onto the bed, I felt a rush of adrenaline and concern. "What happened?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I was staying in room 8 with my friend," she began, her voice shaky. "We heard them arguing, but then it turned violent. I ran out, and when I looked back, I saw there was blood." The weight of her words sank in, and a cold chill crept through the room. I glanced toward the door, half expecting someone to burst in at any moment. Are they still in there?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," she said, her eyes wide with terror, "but they'll come for me. They always do." A knot tightened in my stomach as I tried to process her story. I wanted to call the police, but something in the back of my mind whispered that it wouldn't matter. I could feel the tension building in the room, thick and suffocating, as I considered my next move. Just then, I heard footsteps outside my door, slow and deliberate. My heart raced as I glanced at the woman, who had gone pale. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice low. "Just stay quiet," she whispered, her eyes darting around the room. I pressed my ear to the door, the sound of muffled voices filtering through. "Where did she go?" one of them growled, and my heart sank. It was the voice from room 8. "Did you check room 7? Another replied, their tone dripping with malice. I backed away from the door, panic flooding my veins. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice trembling. "Not yet," she urged, her hands gripping my arm. "They'll see us." We stood in silence, listening as the footsteps moved away. My heart raced as I debated my options. Should we make a run for it? I glanced out the window, noting the distance to the parking lot. Just as I was about to suggest we escape, the door burst open, slamming against the wall. In the doorway stood 2 men, their faces obscured by shadows. "There you are," one of them snarled, stepping into the room with a predatory gleam in his eyes. I pushed the woman behind me, instinct taking over. "Get out of here," I shouted, shoving her toward the window, but it was too late. The men lunged forward, grabbing her and pulling her away from me. "You're not going anywhere," one of them hissed, while the other turned his gaze on me. I felt a surge of rage and fear, adrenaline coursing through my body. I charged at the men, tackling one of them to the ground. We struggled, fists flying, until I felt a sharp pain in my side. I gasped as the other man sank a knife into my flesh. Everything slowed down, the world narrowing to a pinpoint of agony. I could hear the woman screaming, my vision blurring as I fought to stay conscious. I pushed against the man above me, but my strength was fading. In a final act of desperation, I managed to push him off, scrambling to my feet. I glanced at the woman, who was fighting against the other man, her screams piercing the air like shards of glass. With every ounce of willpower, I launched myself at the remaining man, tackling him again. We crashed to the ground, and for a moment, I felt hope surge within me. I grabbed a lamp from the bedside table, swinging it at him with everything I had. The bulb shattered, showering us with glass, but I didn't care. The man recoiled, momentarily stunned. I took my chance, scrambling to my feet. "Run," I shouted at the woman, who was still grappling with the other man. But just as she broke free, the second man grabbed her, yanking her back. "You think you can escape?" he growled, pulling her toward him. In a fit of rage, I lunged at him again, my vision narrowing. I felt the sharp edges of broken glass pierce my skin, but I pushed through the pain, determined to save her. I collided with him, our bodies crashing against the wall. The impact sent us both sprawling to the ground. I landed hard, gasping for air as I felt blood seep from my wound. But as I looked up, I saw the woman scramble for the door, her expression a mix of fear and determination. "Jake!" she screamed, her voice cracking. In that moment, I realized I had to make a choice. I could either flee with her or stay and fight. My heart raced as I made my decision. "Go! Get out of here!" I yelled, my voice hoarse. She hesitated for a moment, eyes filled with gratitude and fear, but then she bolted for the door, bursting into the night. I turned back to the men, adrenaline pumping through my veins as I prepared for one final fight. But before I could react, I felt a heavy weight crash down on me as the man I had tackled earlier lunged forward, tackling me to the ground. I struggled beneath him, but the room spun, darkness creeping in at the edges of my vision. Just as I thought it was over, I heard sirens blaring in the distance, growing closer by the second. The men exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from rage to fear. They cursed under their breath and retreated, disappearing into the shadows. As the door swung open, a rush of light flooded the room, illuminating the chaos that had unfolded. A police officer stood in the doorway, his expression a mix of confusion and concern. "What's going on here?" he shouted, rushing to my side. I struggled to catch my breath, blood pooling beneath me. "Help her," I gasped, my vision blurring as the world began to fade. The last thing I remember was the officer calling for backup, his voice echoing in the darkness as I slipped into unconsciousness. When I awoke in a hospital bed days later, the fear had settled deep within me. I learned that the woman had escaped and the police had apprehended the men, but I knew the scars would remain both inside and out. As I lay there, staring at the sterile ceiling, I realized that the nightmares of that night would haunt me forever. I had gone to the Silver Pines Motel seeking solace, but instead I had found darkness. It was a reminder that sometimes the places we seek refuge in are not what they seem, and the shadows that linger just outside our line of sight can swallow us whole. I should have just slept in my car. That's the thought that still haunts me. If I had just fought through the discomfort of a stiff neck and cold feet, none of this would have happened. But after 10 straight hours on the road, exhaustion won. The blinking vacancy sign outside the Pinewood Motel seemed like a blessing at the time, cheap, quiet, and nearly empty. But the problem wasn't that the motel was empty. The problem was that it wasn't. My name is Nate, and I was on my way back home to Ohio after attending my cousin's wedding in Denver. I wasn't in a rush, so I decided to drive instead of flying. I figured a long road trip might clear my mind, get me away from the monotony of my life for a while. Truthfully, I had nothing waiting for me back home. Just a job I tolerated, a one-bedroom apartment filled with unwashed dishes, and a cat who only acknowledged my existence when the food bowl was empty. I had recently gone through a breakup, and I needed space to breathe. I wasn't even supposed to stop that night. My plan was to push through to the next town. But when my eyelids started drooping and my vision blurred on the dark highway, I knew I had no choice. The Pinewood Motel was the only thing in sight for miles, just a small rundown building sitting beneath a burnt-out street lamp. The only sign of life was the buzzing neon sign flickering against the night sky. I should just kept driving. The front desk was inside a small, cluttered office reeking of stale cigarettes. A heavy-set man in a stained undershirt barely looked up from his newspaper when I walked in. $40, he grunted. I handed over the cash, and he slid a brass key across the counter. Room 6. No signature, no ID check, nothing. I was too tired to question it. The room was about what I expected, musty, dimly lit, and freezing cold despite the rattling air conditioner in the window. A faded floral bedspread covered the mattress, and the carpet was so thin I could see patches of concrete beneath it. I locked the door, checked the bathroom, no soap, no shampoo, just a single damp towel, and collapsed onto the bed without bothering to undress. Just as I started drifting off, I heard it. A knock. Not at my door, at the room next to mine. At first, it was light. A single tap-tap, silence. Then, another. Tap, tap. I ignored it. Not my problem. I turned onto my side, pulling the thin blanket over me. Tap, tap. Louder this time. I sighed, sitting up. Thin walls, I could hear everything. Probably just some late-night visitors. I lay back down, letting the sound fade into the background. And then, knock, knock. Not next door. This time, it was coming from my wall. I sat up, heart pounding. It wasn't the door. It was the wall between my room and the next. Someone was knocking on our shared wall. I swallowed. Maybe they just misjudged the distance. Maybe it was an accident. Then the knocking became rhythmic. A slow, deliberate pattern. Knock, knock, knock. Silence. Then, a whisper, right next to my ear. Hello? I jumped back, nearly falling off the bed. My breath came fast, my pulse thudding in my ears. It must have been someone in the next room talking through the wall. I hesitated, then finally croaked out, "Ah, hey!" Silence. I waited, but the voice didn't return. My nerves were shot, but I forced myself to laugh. I was exhausted, probably half asleep already. Maybe the walls were even thinner than I thought, and someone was talking to themselves. I lay back down, and for a while there was nothing but the distant hum of the highway. I must have dozed off because the next thing I remember was my phone vibrating. I squinted at the screen. No caller ID. I hesitated, then answered. Static. Hello? I rasped. More static, then barely audible beneath the fuzz. Don't open the door. My stomach turned to ice. Who is this? I whispered. No response, just static. Then the call ended. I stared at the phone, my breathing uneven. A prank? A wrong number? I sat up, suddenly feeling wide awake. And then, a single knock at my door. I froze. Knock. Slow. Measured. I stared at the door, my pulse hammering. Knock. Knock. It wasn't the polite kind. Not someone delivering room service or a confused guest knocking by mistake. It was expectant, waiting. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling. I pulled up the motel's number and called the front desk. No answer. The knock came again, a little louder this time. Then, the doorknob rattled. I bolted upright, backing toward the bathroom. My heart was in my throat. The rattling stopped. Silent. Then, the voice. "Can I come in?" My blood turned to ice. It wasn't right. The voice was flat, emotionless, like someone imitating speech but not quite understanding how it worked. I forced myself to stay silent. Seconds passed. Then, the sound of slow, shuffling footsteps moving away from my door. I let out the breath I'd been holding. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. At dawn, I gathered my things and all but sprinted to the front desk. The heavyset man was still there, still reading his newspaper like nothing had happened. I slammed my key down. "Who else is staying here?" He barely looked up. "Just you." My stomach dropped. "No, the room next to mine, room 7. He frowned. "Kid, we don't have a room 7. I stared at him. "That's not possible." I turned, pointing toward the row of rooms outside. My heart nearly stopped. The room next to mine. Wasn't there? It wasn't a room at all, just a bricked-up wall, as if a room had once existed but had been sealed shut years ago. I felt dizzy, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. "You okay?" the man asked. I couldn't respond. I turned and left without another word. I drove for 3 hours before I finally pulled over at a gas station, my hands still shaking on the wheel. I checked my call log. The call from last night, it wasn't there, like it had never happened. I haven't stayed in a motel since. I was just looking for a place to rest. That's all the Sundown Motel was supposed to be: a bed, a roof, a brief pause in my endless drive. I wasn't expecting much when I pulled in. The neon vacancy sign buzzed and flickered, barely holding on, casting sickly red light onto the cracked asphalt. A light rain had started, turning the lot into a shimmering, empty void. I wish I'd kept driving. My name's Daniel, 35, divorced. I wasn't running from anything. Not really. I was just in between places, floating from job to job, state to state, trying to figure out what came next. I'd left Chicago that morning, planning to stop in a proper city by nightfall, but the highway had a way of stretching on forever. By the time I spotted the Sundown Motel, my eyes burned from exhaustion. I hadn't passed another town in miles. The gas station I'd stopped at hours before had been the only sign of life, and even that felt abandoned. So I pulled in. The office was dimly lit, the walls lined with peeling wallpaper and old tourist brochures curling at the edges. A man sat behind the counter, staring at a tiny TV. He looked about 60, though something about him felt older. His skin was papery thin, almost translucent under the yellow light. "Just one night," I told him, sliding a crumpled bill across the counter. He didn't say a word, just pushed a key toward me. Room 3. The room was better than I expected. A little musty, sure, but clean enough. The carpet was old and thin, the walls a faded beige. A small window faced the lot, where my car was the only one parked. I locked the door, tossed my bag onto the chair, and fell onto the bed. The mattress creaked under me, but I didn't care. My limbs felt like dead weight. Then I heard it. A knock. Not at the door, at the window. My eyes shot open. I lay still, listening. Maybe I'd imagined it, the wind or the rain. Knock, knock, slow, deliberate. I turned my head toward the window. The blinds were shut. My breath felt too loud in my ears. I sat up, every nerve on edge. "Hello." Silence. I hesitated, then moved to the window, heart pounding. With one quick motion, I yanked the blinds open. Nothing. Just my car, the empty lot, the flickering neon sign. I let out a shaky breath, locking the window for good measure. Just my mind playing tricks on me, just exhaustion. I climbed back into bed, convincing myself it was nothing. The rest of the night was quiet. No more knocking, no strange sounds. When I woke up, sunlight was bleeding through the blinds. It was still early, maybe 6 a.m., but I was awake. I decided to grab coffee before hitting the road. I stepped outside and froze. There were footprints in the wet pavement outside my window. They led away from my room, toward the woods behind the motel. I felt my pulse hammer in my throat. I scanned the lot, the other rooms, no other cars, no movement. The clerk hadn't mentioned other guests. Maybe it was him. Maybe he was checking the rooms. I told myself that, forced myself to breathe. Still, a part of me itched to get in my car and just go, but I wanted answers first. The front office was empty. The little TV was still on, showing static. A cup of coffee sat half-finished on the counter. "Hello?" I called. No answer. I peered behind the counter. The chair was still warm. The air smelled faintly of cigarettes. Something wasn't right. I turned to leave and noticed the key rack on the wall. Only one key was missing. Room 3. Every other key was covered in dust, thick dust, as if they hadn't been touched in years. A chill crawled up my spine. I backed out of the office, my heart slamming against my ribs. My car keys were in my pocket. I just needed to get in the car and leave. I turned the corner and stopped cold. The footprints were gone. The wet pavement was untouched, smooth, as if no one had ever walked there. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. I was losing it. I had to be. I rushed to my car, fumbling with my keys, shoving them into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I gripped the wheel like a lifeline. Then I glanced up at the rearview mirror and saw someone standing in my room. The curtains had been pulled back, and through the window, I saw the outline of a figure, still, watching me. I didn't wait. I slammed my foot on the gas and tore out of the lot, gravel spraying behind me. I didn't stop driving until I reached the next town. I pulled into a diner, my hands still shaking as I ordered coffee. I had to know. I pulled out my phone and searched Sundown Motel. Nothing. Not a single listing. I tried searching for motels along the highway. Still nothing. It was like it didn't exist. I sat there staring at my screen, my heart pounding. Then, on a whim, I searched for missing persons in the area, and I found them. Dozens of people, all vanishing along that stretch of highway over the last 30 years. Travelers, people just passing through. People like me. I scrolled, stomach twisting until I saw a photo of the front desk clerk. Only the article wasn't about him working there. It was his obituary. I don't know who or what gave me that key. I don't know who was in my room, watching me leave. All I know is this. When I finally got back on the road, I checked my rearview mirror one last time, and for a split second, I saw the Sundown Motel again, flickering in the distance. And this time, the neon sign didn't say vacancy. It said welcome back. I should have just kept driving. It's what I keep telling myself, over and over, as I sit here trying to make sense of everything. If I had just ignored the weariness in my bones, if I had just pushed through a few more miles, none of this would have happened. But exhaustion has a way of making decisions for you. And when I saw that glowing vacancy sign flickering like a dying heartbeat, I pulled into the lot without thinking. I just wanted a place to rest. My name is Daniel Hayes. I'm no one special, just a guy who spends more time on the road than he does at home. I work in freelance logistics. That's a fancy way of saying I drive a truck for people who don't want to deal with big shipping companies. It's mostly dull work, a lot of silence and gas station coffee, but it pays well enough. That night, I was on my way to deliver a shipment of antique furniture from Kansas City to some wealthy collector in Denver. I was making good time until fatigue caught up with me. That's how I ended up at the Pinecrest Motel. The place was a relic from another era, the kind of roadside stop that probably saw its last renovation before I was born. The sign flickered in and out, casting erratic shadows over the cracked asphalt. There was only one car in the lot, an old blue sedan with a dented bumper. The air smelled like damp wood and something faintly metallic, though I figured it was just my truck's engine cooling off. Inside, the front desk was empty. A small bell sat on the counter, tarnished with age. I rang it once. A man shuffled out from the back office, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He was middle-aged, with thinning hair and a slouch that made him look perpetually defeated. His name tag read Greg. "Need a room?" he asked, voice hoarse, like he hadn't spoken in hours. "Yeah, just for the night." He glanced at the old registry book in front of him, flipped a few pages. "Room 6 is open. $40. I handed over the cash. No ID check, no signature required. Just a heavy brass key slid across the counter. Room 6 was exactly what I expected. Stale air, peeling wallpaper, a bedspread with cigarette burns. A TV sat on a wooden dresser, its screen covered in dust. The bathroom light flickered when I switched it on. and the mirror was cracked in one corner. I didn't care. I dropped my duffel on the chair, toed off my boots, and collapsed onto the mattress. My body ached from the long drive, and for the first time in hours, I let out a deep breath. The silence was comforting. Then I heard it, a voice, faint, just on the edge of perception, like someone whispering in the next room. I sat up, listening. The walls were thin, sure, but it didn't sound like normal conversation. It was more rhythmic, a murmuring cadence, like someone reciting something under their breath. I glanced at the wall separating my room from the next, room 7, the only other occupied room, as far as I could tell. I turned on the TV to drown it out. Sometime later, I woke up to a knock, 3 soft taps at my door. I checked the clock, 2:47 a.m. For a long moment, I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, hoping I had imagined it. Then it came again, 3 precise knocks. I slid out of bed, crossed to the door, and peered through the peephole. No one was there. A chill crept up my spine. I stood there for a while, waiting, my pulse heavy in my ears. Finally, I turned the lock and cracked the door open just enough to peek outside. The lot was empty. The neon vacancy sign buzzed weakly in the distance. The night air felt unnaturally still, as if the whole world had paused. Then I saw it, the door to room 7. It was open just a sliver, darkness yawning inside. Something moved within, a slow shift, a shadow pulling away from deeper blackness. I slammed my door shut and threw the deadbolt. I barely slept after that. Every creak of the old building sent my nerves flaring. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting it to swing open on its own. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and I drifted into an uneasy sleep. A sound woke me up again, this time from inside the room. I bolted upright. The chair had moved. It was closer to the bed now, angled slightly, as if someone had been sitting there. My duffel bag was open. I was sure I had zipped it. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of something sour and decayed. My skin prickled with the overwhelming sense that I was being watched. Then came the whisper, right next to my ear. A single word, stay. I grabbed my keys and bolted. Outside, the lot was shrouded in mist. The air was thick with it, swirling in unnatural patterns. My truck sat where I left it, but as I reached it, something caught my eye. The blue sedan. Its windows were fogged over. The driver's side door hung slightly open. I hesitated. Some part of me, some instinct buried deep in my bones, told me not to look, but I did. There was a man inside, or what was left of him. His face was frozen in an expression of sheer terror, his mouth locked open in a silent scream. His skin was sallow, pulled tight over his skull, and his eyes were gone. Hollow sockets stared back at me, black and endless. A whisper behind me, stay. I didn't turn around. I jumped into my truck, started the engine with shaking hands, and tore out of there without looking back. I don't know what I saw that night. I don't know what was in room 7 or why the Pinecrest Motel still stands when it should have rotted away years ago. But I do know this. When I checked the map later, trying to pinpoint where it had been, I found nothing. No Pinecrest Motel. No rundown rest stop on that stretch of highway. It wasn't there, as if it had never existed. And yet, when I close my eyes, I still hear the whisper, stay.